Hello everybody, welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here. We got an absolutely packed show for you here today, making up on some of the news that we missed this past Friday. Sorry about that, but we're back. We are starting with the debt ceiling. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warning a pretty big speech today. The U.S. could have run out of cash to pay its debts by June 1st. Biden says he's going to try and meet with lawmakers on the 9th of May to discuss ways to avoid a default. The question is, which lawmakers? What will he be talking about? Those are things that are definitely going to be looked at very closely. Meanwhile, Silicon Valley Bank, now First Republic Bank, as it just got sold off. We'll take a look at, it's been rumored to be in a little bit of trouble for quite a long time, but it's just gone to JP Morgan Chase. We'll take a look at some of the problems there and how they could reflect into some of the banking industry by and large. Also, Noam Chomsky, the director of the CIA, and many, many more. Some of the people that the Wall Street Journal is now reporting met with Jeffrey Epstein at one point or another in a really remarkable situation. Also, we'll do a whip around of some electoral news. Donald Trump has decided to consort with the enemy, the fake news CNN. He will do a town hall with them, even as he's ridiculed the cable news network relentlessly. It's expected to be probably dragged through the ringer on it, but apparently it's just to get back at Fox. Also, AOC has endorsed Helen Gym in Philadelphia, and why right now is the most exciting time to join the labor movement in decades. All right, a lot of important things to talk about on today's show. We start with this here out of Washington, where Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said on Monday that the United States could run out of money to pay its bills by June 1st if Congress does not raise or suspend the debt limit, putting pressure on President Biden and lawmakers to reach a swift agreement to avoid defaulting on the nation's debt. The more precise warning over when the United States could hit the so-called X date dramatically reduces the projected amount of time lawmakers have to reach a deal before the government runs out of money to pay all of its bills on time. So this new timeline here could really force a flurry of negotiations between the House, Senate, and Biden over government spending, or a high-stakes standoff between the president and the House Republicans who have refused to raise the debt limit without deep spending cuts attached. So this is something that we've seen. The psycho-fiscal conservatives, they passed their wish list of kind of government cuts and really just destroying some of the parts of the government that the people rely on the most, really under the assurances that, hey, we'd have a lot of time to work through this. It wouldn't pass. It wouldn't have to pass right away. Like some of these priorities were, really deeply uncomfortable, like deep cuts to food stamps, deep cuts to entitlement programs that people really rely on were really uncomfortable. Also deep cuts to green energy infrastructure that's going to affect a lot of Republican districts. That really the only reason McCarthy got support on this was the assurance that they would have time to negotiate, they would have a lot of time to work this out and to come to a better deal. This was just something to kind of get the ball rolling, an opening play. Well, it was an opening play, but now the time that they have to negotiate is going to be a lot quicker. So it's going to be now they thought they had like a month extra, and Janet Yellen is saying you'd have till June 1st. So literally just 30 days now, really, to get this all sorted. The new timeline, it could force a pretty big flurry of negotiations. Biden on Monday called the four top leaders of Congress to ask for a meeting on May 9th to discuss fiscal issues. The president reached out to Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Representative Hakeem Jeffries of New York, the minority leader, along with Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, the majority leader, and Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the minority leader. Economists have warned that the failure to raise the debt limit, which caps the total amount of money the United States can borrow, threatens to obviously rock the financial markets and throw the global economy into a financial crisis, because the United States is running a budget deficit, meaning it spends more money than it takes in, must borrow huge sums of money to pay its bills. In addition to paying Social Security benefits, along with salaries for the military and other government workers, the United States is also required to make interest and other payments to the bondholders who own its debt. The Treasury, and if they can't do that, that's a really, really, really big deal. Of course, we can do that, but, there is this debt limit, which is the law saying that if we don't, we're essentially saying that we won't do it if we don't raise the debt limit, saying that we just, because of something in the name of some fiscal responsibility or whatever, even though we are totally, because we have the gold reserve currency, we're in a completely capable position of just continuing to pay back our debts. We just won't allow ourselves to do it because of this arcane measure of we have to raise the debt limit in order to just really continue to pay off our debts. The Treasury Department had previously projected that it could run out of cash sometime in early July, but new estimates make the alarming prospect that raises the alarming prospect that the United States could be unable to make some payments, including to bondholders, in a matter of weeks. Given the current projections, it's imperative Congress act as soon as possible to increase or suspend the debt limit in a way that will provide longer-term certainty to the government that will continue to make its payments. And again, a lot of interesting stuff that Biden could do on this here. He could do a big area of speculation has been around this $1 trillion coin that would essentially raise the debt limit and give the power from the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department to raise the debt limit. The $1 trillion coin would come out of the Federal Reserve, but it would benefit the Treasury to continue to be able to pay off the bondholders who own the debt, and that is something that it was previously thought that would be very, very hard for someone like Jerome Powell, who's definitely an institutionalist, to agree to. But, apparently Jerome Powell is an institutionalist. He wants to see the continued surviving of institutions. So he has hinted now more and more that he may actually be willing to go along with some type of scheme like that. Biden has continued to insist he will not negotiate directly over the limit, saying Congress must do so without conditions, but has been preparing to meet with Democratic and Republican leaders, including McCarthy, at the White House for discussions on taxes and spending. Many administration officials have expressed optimism that those talks could produce a fiscal agreement that could result in the debt limit being raised. So it's going to be interesting to see what they give up with how weak the Biden administration is, and it could be a real time where the Biden administration just completely folds, gives away the farm, and fails in any way to produce some sort of actual response, whether it be a messaging response that makes it more uncomfortable for the Republicans, or just failing to mobilize their base in any way to actually respond to this, or do something actually smart, like go some kind of workaround, some kind of $1 trillion coin workaround, some sort of agreement to raise the debt limit with the substantive Democratic minority plus the very moderate Republicans in the House to try and get around it that way. There's a lot of things that could be done, but it's so far it won't be a surprise to see Biden not do any of them. All right, let's go to our next story just after this.
It's the Spencer Walsh Radio Network.
Oh, baby. Go in the park, getting the latest drop. Got stopped by a late cop. She got me thinking I could date a cop. Cause her uniform pants was so tight. She read me down right. She put me in a pile. She cut up all the lights. She said I have the right to remain silent. Now I gotta holler, sounding like a siren.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to our next story. We are talking about First Republic Bank. And some of the failures that they had. Let's break this down here from Stacey Cowley in the New York Times. And it seems to be that as of this time, there's a little bit of optimism. It seems like a weird thing to say after, one of the largest, second largest failure of a bank in U.S. history. First Republic Bank just went down today. But industry experts are saying that many of the problems were apparently unique to the once high-flying lender. I guess something about long-term treasury bonds, I guess if it's anything like Silicon Valley Bank, but we'll see. The First Republic, as they were hurtled to collapse with the stock dropping precipitously, financial markets were far calmer than in mid-March when the failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank provoked a panic that engulfed the industry. First Republic was seized by regulators early Monday morning and sold to J.P. Morgan Chase. The S&P 500 stock index barely budged in trading, and J.P. Morgan's shares gained 2%. Declines in many smaller bank shares, which were shaken by the turmoil in March, were relatively muted. Echoing the failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, First Republic collapsed after depositors and investors abandoned the institution, pulling their money and selling their shares in droves. These woes also included huge real estate loans that lost value rapidly as interest rates rose. Exactly, so just overextending. Yeah, just the same thing as Silicon Valley here. Really, just completely overextending yourself on interest rates, making making bets that would fail to account for obviously rising interest rates, which kind of spooked wealthy depositors, which were a large portion of the customer base, who then withdrew large amounts of money quickly. Many banks still face tough economic conditions, but under No other prominent lenders appear to have a similar set of urgent challenges. That was underlined over the last few weeks as dozens of regional banks reported their first quarter earnings, offering a less grim assessment of their prospects than many investors and analysts had feared. The problems at First Republic were already visible on March 10th, said Nicholas Veron, a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, referring to the day Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. To me, this is just a leftover from a previous episode. The only surprise here is it's taken so long. Again, I think this is something that seems to be pretty good. Of course, I would not be surprised if there's a few more banks there that have made investments that would be hindered by rising interest rates. I really don't think that would be something that would be the most shocking thing. That someone like the New York Times says, "Oh, everything's fine," but really, there's actually a bit of a bigger problem there. The KBW Regional Bank Index, an index of smaller regional lenders in the United States, lost a little ground, even as First Republic stock was in free fall. Signal investors reviewed First Republic as an isolated problem rather than a harbinger of more trouble to come. That's the message many bank executives have also tried to send as they distance themselves from their stricken rivals. So again, could be a little bit of a false play. Definitely something to view with a little bit of skepticism, but I think for me it does seem relatively fair, relatively unsurprising to say that a lot of these banks, and I think definitely a little bit reassuring for our broader system that this seems to be relatively self-evident from the time of the Silicon Valley Bank collapse, and also that a lot of the same issues were at play. This real estate investment that relied on low interest rates, as soon as that comes up, we see a lot of people. I think crypto was another example of this, as evidenced with Signature Bank, which is the crypto bank, and of course, wealthy investors knowing and wealthy depositors knowing better than anybody. So the financial pressures, they're going to be even better attuned to it. They're very quick to pull their money out of this bank. It was a pretty big difference, obviously, in the response that investors had in March. After the sudden collapse of Silicon Valley, banking indexes plunged, dragging the broader stock market lower amid fears of a credit crunch and spiraling economic crisis. In the weeks since, including the first trading session after First Republic's demise, the S&P has rarely wavered, putting First Republic's troubles in sharper relief. Banking analysts say there are no other sizable banks as visibly on the brink as First Republic was, and they consider it unlikely there'll be any other large government takeovers in the coming weeks. That said, banks still face many risks. Rising interest rates are a blessing and a curse for financial institutions. Banks can earn more money off the loans they make, but they're under greater pressure to offer higher interest rates to encourage depositors to keep their cash where it is. We're going to be paying more for our funding than we thought coming into the year, said Bruce Winfield Van Saun, chief executive of Citizens Financial Group, told analysts on April 19th, echoing a common refrain among banking leaders. Saying pretty much we are going to have a higher interest rate for continuing our funding than we thought, meaning this kind of continuing, and especially with Jerome Powell continuing on the track that he's continuing on in a very, very dangerous method for the economy. The biggest fissure threatening regional banks is in their commercial real estate portfolios. Mid-sized banks are the nation's largest lenders for projects like apartment buildings, office towers, and shopping centers. Higher interest rates are putting stress on the market. More than $1 trillion in commercial real estate loans will come due before the end of 2025. As banks tighten their underwriting, many borrowers will struggle to refinance their debts. Regulators and analysts will be watching to see if these challenges balloon into a broader economic problem. And empty office buildings, that's going to be a particular pain point, as vacancy rates, especially after COVID, are going to be climbing nationwide. So that's definitely something to watch. Their reporting from the New York Times. Now let's get into this in Slate's. There's a pretty crazy situation in the Jeffrey Epstein case. Despite having died in 2019 in a not at all suspicious jailhouse suicide, the financial world hustler, convicted sex criminal, has remained the gift that this is a weird way of phrasing it. Slate is just such a weird freaking website. But anyway, Jeffrey Epstein, Wall Street Journal thing comes out over this past weekend about. Okay, there's some, I don't know exactly how. Thanks to the Wall Street Journal, they have obtained thousands of pages of Epstein's emails and schedules from the period between 2013 and 17 that include the names of individuals who he was scheduled to meet with. In terms of star power, the biggest is probably linguist and activist Noam Chomsky, confirmed to the Journal that he occasionally saw Epstein discuss neurosciences and other subjects. He really, for very creepy reasons that we can kind of get into, he was very much, interested in preserving his certain body parts to, after his death so that they could still be functional in other ways. He was a very weird guy. It was essentially some sort of like immortality play that was, very, very creepy, and he really liked to kind of suck up to and butter up some of the world's greatest minds, like such as Steven Pinker and a lot of people at Harvard and MIT. And it also appears Noam Chomsky, which is pretty, tough for a lot of leftist figures to have to figure out. But he confirmed to the Journal that he occasionally saw Epstein discuss neuroscience and other subjects. There was also an incredible Mad Libs payoff. What does that even mean? Deep in the article concerning a dinner that Chomsky and Epstein reportedly had in New York City. So he apparently said 2 months later, Epstein planned to fly Mr. Chomsky and his wife to have dinner with them and movie director Woody Allen and his soon wife, Soon-Yi Pravin. The documents show if there was a flight, which I doubt, it would have been from Boston to New York 30 minutes. I'm unaware of the principle that requires you I spent to inform you about an evening I spent with a great artist. So obviously it's a little bit defensive there. So it's really, Chomsky is one thing I think kind of separate to, not entirely separate to the whole Epstein program, because of course he has really gone off after a lot of similar figures. I think it was Steven Pinkers of the world, the Alan Dershowitz of the world, these kind of Harvard, MIT, Stanford intellectuals, to kind of make them feel better about themselves and make him feel better about himself, like that he was, hanging out with the top minds of the world, et cetera, et cetera. But also, it's definitely weird to see Chomsky in there, but it is. And I think what is even weirder is this response that if there was a flight, which I doubt, it would have been from like, dude, you would know if there was a flight or not. Like, this is someone who is clearly a pedophile. This is someone who is not, any natural person. It's like, how can you, from the point of view of understanding how the world works, understanding how the fact that this stuff is probably going to get out there, like, what was the internal calculation here? Like, just so stupid that he could think, oh, I'm going to go on this meeting, and to be so snooty about it that, oh, I'm unaware of the principle that requires you that I inform, that requires that I inform you about an evening spent with a great artist. He's talking about Woody Allen there. The problem is you spent the evening with a great pedophile as well. So that is what people are much more concerned. Also, possibly two great pedophiles. If you look at freaking Woody Allen, Jesus Christ. Also, grudgingly confirming that he met with Epstein is William Burns, a longtime State Department figure who's now the director of the CIA. Epstein schedules listed 3 meetings with Burns in 2014, 2 in Manhattan and 1 at a law firm in the District of Columbia. A CIA spokeswoman said Burns remembers meeting Epstein once at the law firm and once in New York. Burns' explanation for their interactions, which perhaps calls into question whether he's the best person to hold the United States' most high-stakes job in the field of information gathering, is the director did not know anything about him other than that he was introduced as an expert in the financial services sector and offered general advice on the transition to the private sector. She said they had no relationship. In limited defense of Burns, his contracts with Epstein took place in 2014 after the financier had served the sentence for this 2008 conviction, but before litigation filed by one of his alleged victims revived scrutiny of the case and behavior. The same could not be said for Catherine Rumler, who, and by the way, backing up quick to William Burns here, I think it is really, kind of well, obviously he knew exactly who Jeffrey Epstein was. This is someone who has, ties to the CIA, who's currently the CIA director, longtime, State Department person, someone who has been around the block, knows these things, and knows, it calls to mind what the former Trump labor secretary who gave Trump who treated Jeffrey Epstein back in Florida, former prosecutor, former Trump labor secretary, prior to that was the prosecutor who gave Jeffrey Epstein a sweetheart deal for sex trafficking in Florida, who said very, kind of the famous quote was, oh, I was told to go easy on him because he belongs to intelligence. Was that something that was playing in the back of William Burns' mind at the time? I think, we cannot say that for certain, obviously, but it is definitely something that, raises my eyebrows. It causes me to make that connection in the back of my mind. But anyway, Catherine Rumler, served as the White House counsel during Barack Obama's administration, is shown to have met and socialized with Epstein dozens of times after leaving the position. She said she regrets ever knowing Epstein and did never ever fly with him on a private plane and never visited his island. Rumler is now the general counsel at Goldman Sachs and the co-chair of the Reputational Risk Committee. So that is something as well. Yeah, I think, always just broader takeaway on this, always very interesting to map out and see, find out more about Jeffrey Epstein, interrogate these connections, and have them be as public knowledge as you. Because even if it's someone like, someone who I, have diminishing respect for, but definitely had more respect for in the past, but still have some degree of respect for, especially in relation to those other figures, like Noam Chomsky, like that is something that, no matter who it is, needs to be interrogated, needs to be fleshed out, and really needs to be understood, because this is someone who has caused a lot of trauma and a lot of suffering for a lot of people, and did it with the help of some very powerful people. So I think that is something to completely be unflinchingly unafraid of revealing and challenging. Okay, so with that being said, and by the way, what an atrociously written article there out of Slate.com. Never recommend that you read any of their writing, because that was rough. We don't use them as sources on the show for a reason. All right. Next up, Donald Trump. He is apparently just scheduled a town hall at CNN, a network he called fake numerous times. And, I will never forget, I definitely will forget, hopefully, but the moment on Twitter of where Trump tweeted this of Trump doing this wrestling move on CNN, and every CNN reporter was like, he wants to have the government kill us or something like that. And it is really kind of crazy now to see that they will, and it just shows you, they come crawling right back. And of course it probably is a little bit embarrassing for both of them after they've spent so much time, both entities, the Trump campaign, Trump and CNN, just kind of shit-talking each other. Now they will kind of come back together for the mutual benefit of both of them, and have a town hall at New Hampshire St. Anselm College next week, marking a major moment at the intersection of politics and media in the still nascent 2024 GOP primary. It's also the latest illustration of an aggressive media strategy that the Trump team is adopting, which is very, very interesting and very similar. I think it really shows you how serious they are, because it is really, really similar to what they were doing in 2016, which is they were going on everything. They were going everywhere, and everywhere would want to eat them up and just gobble them up with, just coverage. They're just talk about Trump, any whether it's on the phone, whether he's speaking through a tin can. We want him on our air. We want him to say whatever he wants. We want just unlimited free media for the Trump campaign. And it seems like early on, after all these years of hand wringing, calling Trump a threat to democracy, it seems like CNN is more than ready to allow Trump to get back to that position, at least early on. And Trump, as kind of a screw you to Fox, is going to be loving it as well. The former president and his staff have re-engaged with the mainstream press corps after largely shutting them. They've been in talks with several notable outlets, including NBC, and he has also invited an array of reporters from mainstream media outlets to fly with him on his plane to and from campaign events. Those in the former president's orbit believe that giving interviews to mainstream outlets, they can broaden Trump's message and create a contrast with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who has widely been seen to be more closed off to mainstream outlets while granting interviews to conservative ones. Probably a trend you got from following Donald Trump. Which is pretty interesting. In May-April, the RNC announced that Fox would host the first debate. Shortly after that, Trump announced on social media that the platform had not given his approval for it, and suggested that he would not participate in a forum hosted by angry Trump and MAGA-hating anchors. He, a week later, announced that CNN announced it would host a town hall with Trump. That was today. That's going to be next week. The town hall would be moderated with Caitlin Collins, who built a reputation in the tough question of Trump, but also someone who comes from a conservative media background, while covering him as the network's White House correspondent. A person familiar with the discussions said CNN approached Trump several months ago. CNN approached the Trump campaign several months ago, and the talks between the two sides continued on on until Monday when the plans were locked down. The former president had largely forsworn participating in any mainstream media interview since leaving the presidency, and CNN in particular has been on the receiving end of Trump's vitriol, and to be fair, they've also thrown quite a bit back. So that is going to be a very, very interesting moment, and something that, it's going to be a lot of fireworks, and it's going to feel really like 2016 all over again, because it really is remarkable on so many levels, just like the fact that, it benefits Trump, but boy, oh boy, do they keep wanting to come and crawl back for more. It's very, very funny. We swore we never call Trump again. He's a threat to our democracy. We need to stop this. But then, of course, what? He wants an interview? He wants to talk to us? And of course, obviously, again, it is very beneficial for Trump as well to get his message out there to a broader audience, to get a much more free media than just talking to insular Fox people. Makes him look, appeals to the kind of Trump-Obama sect that really pushed him over the top in 2016. All right. Let's go now to our next story about Philadelphia in just a minute.
MC, make another hit.
This ain't what you want. Project. This ain't what you want. This ain't what you want.
You're listening to Newsflash right here on the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. Help us grow our audience. Subscribe, rate, and review our show on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. Thank you very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are getting into it today with Helen Gym, a pretty interesting local Democratic primary for the Philadelphia mayor's race. Helen Gym is probably, viewed as like the next Brandon Johnson, is what I would say. Pretty left wing, strong background with education and teachers union, and apparently she is not apparently, she is actually the most progressive candidate in the race. She seems to be now in a statistical tie with her four main primary opponents, according to a new poll released on Friday. So it seems like we have Rebecca Reinhardt at 18, who is another kind of slightly less progressive, someone who's said some pretty unprogressive things, but tries to kind of cast himself as someone who's the more to the left in the race. Sherelle Parker, don't know anything about her. Helen Gym is at 15. Alan Dom and Jeff Brown. Jeff Brown, most right wing in the race, is at 11. The post credibility interval, which is similar to a margin of error, is 3.8 percentage points, and all top 5 candidates fall within that range. So no candidate really here has distinguished themselves. It is a pretty tight, pretty interesting, a pretty close race here. But Helen Gym has just gotten a pretty big endorsement. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez became the third member of the squad, a band of congressional progressives garnering national attention, to endorse Gym after Ayanna Pressley and Jamal Bowman. Helen isn't afraid to take on tough fights or go up against big special interests, and when she does, she wins. Ocasio-Cortez said she's delivered real results for constituents, making communities safer, housing more affordable, and public schools stronger. I am proud to endorse her. Brendan Phillips, Gim's campaign manager, said, I don't really care. Anyway, the new ad, the new endorsement came just days after a new ad began to air in Philadelphia attacking Gym. The ads hit Gym for voting against the 2019 Philadelphia City Council bill to strengthen regulation of pharmaceutical sales. Her campaign sent a cease and desist letter to local television stations on Friday, saying the ad made false claims. A new group called the Coalition for Safety and Equitable Growth is spending $200,000 on the ads, according to reporting from the Philadelphia Inquirer. The group has not yet filed paperwork with the Board of Ethics and the Office of City Commissioners, so it won't be clear who's funding the group until it has filed a required financial disclosure on May 5th. And Gym is one of the 9 candidates in the mayor's May 16th Democratic primary, which will likely determine who takes the mayor's office in the overwhelmingly blue Philadelphia. There's no runoff in the city, so the winner, unlike Chicago, so the winner will advance the general election in November. Gim's campaign manager McPhillips and her supporters on Twitter speculated the sources of the ad was Jeff Yass, a billionaire mega donor to Republicans and moderate Democrats. The Political Action Committee for the group, largely funded by Yass, sent out controversial mailers last year attacking several progressive candidates for the state legislature. He is a sole funder of a new federal PAC tied to fight progressives. Launch to fight progressives. Interestingly, though, Yas also funds a far-right Israeli think tank that has been instrumental in ongoing efforts to weaken the country's judiciary as well. So interesting to see if we get some kind of AIPAC, DMFI money coming in on this as well, because he's ties to that sector of organized money as well. While he has become more active in national politics in recent years, he's been long influential in state and local politics in Philadelphia through the Commonwealth Foundation and its network of affiliated groups with advocates for taking Pennsylvania policy back to its roots through cutting funding for public schools and other social services. For Gym supporters, though, the attack ads against her are a clear sign that the campaign is competitive. So yeah, it's going to be a really pretty crucial moment here to kind of secure one of the top mayoralties, I guess, in the state or in the nation. For someone who is really unambiguously of the left, someone who's going to really kind of push and prefer better public services, better public schools, and kind of a more equitable, treatment of the poor, the homeless, and some of the city's billionaires and stuff like that. Just like we've seen in Chicago, we got with Brandon Johnson, Michelle Wu in Boston. Eric Adams definitely does not fit the description, but there's a pretty strong movement to challenge him next time around in New York City. And of course, we have Karen Bass in Los Angeles making things interesting. So she would be, I think, definitely a procession, or one of the people in kind of a procession of very progressive mayors. So that's definitely going to be interesting and something to watch going down the road here. All right, let's go down to our last story of the day, and we start. This is with Alex Press in Jacobin as we celebrate May Day here today. She writes, last week Sean Fain was the newly elected president of the United Auto Workers, traveled from Detroit to Washington, D.C. to meet with Sean O'Brien, who is the newly elected president of the Teamsters, who won a pretty big upset over James Hoffa's chosen successor to take the helm of IBT, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. The same week, the Teamsters announced they had organized a union of Amazon delivery drivers in California and negotiated the first tentative union contract of Amazon workers in the United States, though what followed is complicated, and workers voted to unionize their 1,100 person workplace at logistics giant DHL. Also last week, the NLRB went to federal court seeking an injunction to reinstate fired Starbucks worker Jason Saxton, and the board wants a nationwide cease and desist order against Starbucks for firing union supporters. Workers at Manhattan's Barnes & Noble filed an NLRB petition for a union election. They were not the first location to do so. Some 5,700 graduate students at Stanford University also filed with the NLRB, the largest union election petition of the year thus far. University of Minnesota grad students won in a landslide with 2,487 votes in favor of unionizing and a mere 70 against. The University of Michigan graduate students continue to strike even in the face of police harassment and arrests. It's far from a comprehensive look at the U.S. labor movement activity of just the last week alone, but is a real revealing snapshot of the contemporary working class organization on May Day 2023. The reform movements in both the UAW and Teamsters, while each distinct in their character, have wind at their backs, and while the union leaders tend to use fiery rhetoric no matter what their actual plans may be, all signs suggest that the two unions, representing a powerful set of manufacturing and logistics workers, are starting to really change the way they operate. Both unions are also preparing to negotiate their largest contracts and vowing to strike if necessary. The Teamsters' 3,500 worker contract with the United Parcel Service, or UPS, expires on July 31st, and the UAW's 150,000 worker contract with the big three automakers expires on September 14th. As newly elected UAW Region 9A Director Brandon Manchilla put it at a recent New York fundraiser for the Teamsters for a Democratic Union, united, the entire labor movement is going to get what we deserve. Another agenda item for reformers in the UAW and Teamsters is new organizing in workplaces where a lack of unions not only means low wages for those workers, but poses an existential threat for their unionized counterparts. At the UAW, the priority is electrical vehicle, or EV plants, where automakers have largely managed to keep non-union labor. While workers have unionized EV plants, they still receive lower wages and less benefits than the majority of workers covered by the union's Big Three master contract. For the Teamsters, their priority is Amazon. While the Palmdale, California delivery workers are forming the first bargaining unit to result from the Teamsters' vow to organize the tech behemoth, the coming year will likely see new unions emerge. Not only among delivery drivers, but at warehouses or Amazon's smaller delivery stations too. The Teamsters cannot evade the challenge of organizing Amazon, no matter how complicated it may be, or the company's non-union drivers will continue to undercut the union's hard-won compensation and standards. Because, of course, if they got Amazon non-union drivers running around, what does that say for the truckers and Teamster truckers that are getting paid quite well? More generally, Amazon has hit foreseeable walls, or Amazon unionizing has, with the ALU, which won an NLRB union election at JFK, a massive warehouse in Staten Island, has not yet forced Amazon to the bargaining table. The union has suffered setbacks elsewhere, too, losing NLRB elections at LDJ5, warehouse next to JFK, and ALB1, a warehouse in upstate New York, and withdrawing election position in Moreno Valley, California. No other existing unions have filed for an NLRB election after an Amazon warehouse after the loss in Bessemer, Alabama. As for other new organizing that has inspired workers across the country and captured public attention, it continues apace. Campaigns at Chipotle, Ben & Jerry's, REI, Trader Joe's, and Apple have developed. So too is organizing in higher education and healthcare, and it should not be forgotten. The key force behind Brandon Johnson's win in the Chicago mayoral election was the Chicago Teachers Union. But new organizing, particularly in the almost entirely non-union private sector, unionization rate there at 6%, faces the same obstacle as JFK and Starbucks workers, retaliatory firings, and employers' refusal to bargain. How can workers not only force employers to the bargaining table, but win a first contract? No one has an easy answer. Those on the left of labor movement often speak of strikes for recognition as a more militant means of forcing an employer to stop fighting unionization, but some workers, those at Starbucks, have been striking to reinstate fired coworkers and to pressure companies to come to the bargaining table as well. While they've had some success in the former aim, there is little progress thus far in the latter. The coffee giant continues to systematically violate labor law, going so far as to fire several union supporters, including one who many consider the union campaign's founder, a mere 2 days after Howard Schultz testified at a Senate hearing chaired by Bernie Sanders, the title of which was "No Company is Above the Law: The Need to End Illegal Union Busting at Starbucks." So who's going to stop them? It's similarly hard to imagine what it will take to force Amazon to sit down across the bargaining table with someone like ALU or Kristen Smalls. A spate of new organizing campaigns at other Amazon facilities paired with a credible strike threat at JFK 8 at the very least. And there's another concerning trend. Conservatives are engaged in a campaign that uses bigotry to accelerate the decimation of public sector unions. The strategy is the most obvious in the wave of new book bans and general hysteria over the possibility of teachers and librarians might reveal to students that there is such thing as being gay, trans, or black, banning discussion of identity politics and critical race theory, both of which are rarely defined. Such fear-mongering works as a wedge, a way into stripping workers of funding, union security, and workplace democracy. It's an attack on unions in the public sector in general, and this is made explicit by many of the strategy's architects. As Kelly Craft, a Republican candidate for Kentucky's governor, put it in a bizarre campaign ad that features purple-haired woke bureaucrats parachuting into a public school to force students to learn about pronouns. Quote, "I will dismantle the Kentucky Department of Education." Sounds great. Who needs that? While the heightened interest in unions organizing, particularly among young people, and especially those who supported Bernie Sanders, some of whom are at the heart of the biggest labor stories of the past few years, translate into the revival of a working class organization, in general as a concept, reigning in capital's near absolute rule. Will we figure out how to surmount the obstacles to organizing that some of the millions of Americans who say they want to join a union are up against? Can a militant spirit among the rank and file and reformer leadership at the top reverse the decline in the UAW and the Teamsters, and much less transform them into leaders of working class movements more broadly? We can't know unless we try. Fortunately, as I often tell younger socialists wondering how to best contribute to the left, never in my life has there been a more exciting time to devote oneself to building of a working-class self-organization. And it's been a long time since the U.S. and labor movement was this open to experimentation. Plus, don't forget, film and television writers nationwide are poised to strike as soon as tomorrow. If you want to form your own opinions about the state of the U.S. labor movement, walking a picket line is a damn good place to start. That is Alex Press in Jacobin, and that is our show, ladies and gentlemen. We will be back this Wednesday.